Welcome to this frequently asked questions. This time, we're going to talk about data retention. So, what is data retention? How long have you got to keep it for? And stop hiding underneath the blanket.
Oh no, please let me hide under the blanket. I hate this question.
It's a great question.
I hate it. Okay. Deep breath first. We're talking SEN. We just talk SEN first.
Okay, SEN data protection. Data retention.
Retention, not protection.
SEN data retention is what we're talking about.
Okay. There is a guide called the IRMS, which link to it is down here, which will show you what you need to keep and for how long, and how you are supposed to dispose of it, destroy it, or pass it on. There are 2 points at which we usually end up faffing about with data, or SEN data, folders, files, whatever you want to call them.
Transition.
Transition is one of them.
And end of year. No, when they get to 25.
Actually, before that, but yeah. Near enough.
There.
So, transition. So, primary to secondary. Okay. And this is a biggie. Primary schools, you should not have any data on your students after they have left you.
None whatsoever?
No. Not nameable data.
Okay.
Okay. You should be passing, and we're talking SEN, I'm ignoring all of the curriculum stuff. From an SEN perspective, you should not hold on to any of that data after that child has left you. So it must be transferred to their secondary placement. And if a child leaves you mid-year, primary or secondary, you have 2 working weeks to transfer that information to their new school.
Only 2 working weeks?
2 working weeks.
Wow. It's not very long, is it?
It's not very long, but it's reasonable.
Okay.
Well, let's face it, if you're the secondary school and you haven't got the data on that child, 2 weeks is a hell of a long time, not knowing what
that is true.
Okay, so primary schools, you must pass it all on. Very often we get asked, can I keep a copy of it? No, you can't. Okay, if you want me to be blunt about it, no, you cannot. You are breaking numerous protection rules and legislation by doing so. Do we keep a hold of it? You can keep a hold of anonymised material. So, if you've got some data in there, for example, you ran a toe-by-toe provision last year and you've got a set of data on reading ages and spelling ages, you can keep that data as long as you don't have the names next to it. That's okay, because you're using that for your analysis purposes. We're allowed to keep that, but we're not allowed to keep a copy of the EHCP or a copy of the paediatrician letter or whatever else. And I know that there is this big concern of, well, what happens if I transfer the file and the school doesn't actually get it? Well, that's where you need to make sure that it's being signed for, or that you're transferring it to the right place. The number of times I've had the wrong file appear on my desk is scary. Very scary.
Someone else that's not even in the school, let's have their file.
Yeah, there's a bit of a GDPR breach there too. And that is actually where there's a big issue for primary schools, because secondary schools want the information as soon as possible. So they want it in the summer term, but you're still working with it. And that's a point at which you may end up with duplicate copies, because technically that child has been named as going to that school, and that SENCO and school have got to prepare for them. So we need to share some information with them. Their most recent plan or whatever you've got is probably useful. Okay, don't need the full lot though. And then that you assume, because you don't get informed otherwise, that child starts there in September. However, what happens is appeals run all the way up to the start of the September term. In fact, some of them actually run past that as well. So that child may have decided, I don't actually want to go to that secondary school after they've done transition day, didn't like it, they've applied to go somewhere else, gone through a process, they actually end up going to the school down the road, but you still think they were going here, so you end up sending the file here. That's why that happens.
Right.
However, what I'm trying to say is we shouldn't be giving that full file to the secondary school in the summer term. We just need to give them enough information that they can plan for that child. And then once we know where that child has gone, we transfer it over. Now, my personal process for doing that, if I wasn't using electronic software, because that is the solution to it, my personal process for that would be, as the primary SENCO, to contact my secondary schools, because actually you have fewer to contact than the secondary school does, and say, have you received such and such a student, and list out the students that you thought were going to them. They then have 2 or 3 days to go down that list and go, yes, yes, no, yes, yes, yes. You then transfer them the 5 files they've said yes to. The one that they've said no to, you keep a hold of until one of the other schools comes to you and says, have you got the file for Fred? Okay. So that's the first part of transition. So primary schools have not got a storage issue because you keep their files from nursery through to year 6. They leave you in year 6 or they leave you before year 6, and you are transferring that information on. And can we just say you cannot prune that file? If you have at some point shoved it in that file, it must have some form of importance. Therefore, you must send it on. You can't pull out the bits that you fancy sending on and shred the rest of it.
Even if it's not relevant to where they are in...
Absolutely not.
Okay. Well, it's not relevant, so I don't know why you send it on.
Because it may become relevant in the future.
Okay.
You know, if a child's got a speech and language therapy report from year 1 and I haven't used it by the time I get to year 6, that's okay. But what if they start showing speech and language needs in year 7 and I've got no record of what happened or the fact that they've had a historical need there? I still need that information. And I should say, any child who's not on your SEN register in year 6 but was on the SEN register previously also needs that information transferring.
Okay.
So they might have been on your SEN register in year 2. They came off because they've made sufficient progress. You believe they no longer have a need. That's okay.
Still send the file anyway.
Send the file, because when we get to secondary, we sometimes find that those coping mechanisms that they have fall to pieces. We still need the information.
Regression.
Let's hope not. Okay, so that's our first one. Secondary schools. So you still get the in-year transfers, you still have your 2 working weeks to transfer the information, etc. Secondary schools, when the child reaches 16, if they are still with you, you remain responsible for their file and their information until they turn 25. However, there is a data retention part that sits on the end of that.
I nearly got it right.
You didn't. So if they're 16 in your school, you are responsible for it. That means you need a pretty big storage cupboard, especially if you're still talking paper files. I'll come to electronic a little bit later. But you've got a paper file. You have to maintain it for the 5 years they're with you. You have to keep it up to date. You then have to keep it. Now, an EHCP can go on until the child's 25. With your 6th form colleges, or if they stay with you for 6th form, or if they go on to a traineeship or something where their EHCP remains in place, if we're talking EHCP, then you may pass a copy of the plan across to them, but their main file stays with you.
Okay, so they're in 6th form. That's fine because it's still within the same place.
Not necessarily 6th form colleges in most areas are separate.
6th form colleges, so that stays within the secondary school.
Yeah.
Even if they go to university?
If you go to university and the HCP is rescinded anyway, and SEN files don't follow you.
There you go. I didn't know
So
that.
your school files don't follow you.
I'll edit that bit out because that sounded like a really kind of, oh, everybody knows this information.
No, you'd be surprised actually. Most SENCOs because the SENCO to practice says EHCP 0 to 25, a lot of people assume that, oh, okay, that means they've got it to the end of university, which is usually around about 21, 22.
And that's where I was going.
Actually, it isn't, because if you go on to that higher level of education, it's considered that you don't need an EHCP because you don't need a special educational provision that is above and beyond.
Okay.
Okay. It becomes part of DLA. It becomes part of Disability Living Allowance and that, and it becomes part of the Equalities Act. Yeah.
Okay.
It's a disability as opposed to an educational need at that point.
Okay.
And that's also to do with compulsory education ages and all the rest of it. Because university is not a compulsory education.
No. No, you don't have to go to it.
No.
I never
So,
will.
well, you are now.
Oh, I am now. My sins.
So, a secondary school, we're going to keep that information. All right. So, we've got to keep it until at least 25. However, there is a caveat on this. In that, there is a data retention period beyond that. So because an EHCP could continue to age 25, or at age 24, a student who didn't enter higher education has applied for an EHCP, would be a bit pointless, but just go with the flow. They have to be able to refer back to the records. So there is a data retention period of a minimum 6 years that sits on the end of that. So actually you have to keep files until that student is 31 years from date of birth.
31 years from date of birth. So that's 15 years after they've left.
Yeah. And then you have to use secure destroy of those files.
It's one of those vans that comes along with it. I've seen one of those.
It depends. So some things you actually have to shred before you put it through that van. Or you have to hire the service in. So this is why I say look at the IRMS guidance, because it is very, very clear which parts of it you are responsible for, not you, but the school is responsible for shredding, which parts can be sent to secure disposal units, which is what you're referring to, which parts you can just throw in the bin. Very little you can just throw in the bin these days, but...
Bonfire. I'm not allowed to say bonfire then, obviously.
Shall we talk electronic?
So what about electronic data then? When do we have to get rid of that, and how do we transfer it?
Gosh, how do you transfer it is a complicated question. However, the timescales are the same. So you still have to transfer information within 2 weeks. Primary school should not be keeping a hold of it, and that includes on your SharePoint file or your Teams file or wherever else is you've got it, or your OneDrive. And secondary schools have to maintain it until age 31. Okay. It gets complicated with transference of electronic files. If you're using specific programs, and I can use TES EduKey Provision Map here because I know how theirs works, there is a transitioning module. So you can, the secondary school requests those files from the primary goes, yes, you can have these, and it transfers that information electronically. However, in the primary school, it is still sitting in your EduKey database. You physically have to go in and delete it yourself. You are still responsible. EduKey can't take that responsibility for you. You have to do it yourself.
So you mean there could be people out here watching this and thinking, oh God, I haven't pressed the delete button inside the system. Go and press that delete button. Not now, though.
Not literally right now.
Wait, we've got a bit more.
Okay. Secondary, it's the same. So you would maintain that file. Now, actually, what it does in secondary is at the top of the screen, it's got a filter for age 25 and age 31, where you can tick it and it will tell you which files you are due to delete at that point. So I can talk to you about that one from that perspective. Those of you who have got something like CPOMs that you're using, as far as I am aware, when you use the transfer of system, so you're transferring from primary to secondary, you are basically passing over the rights of that information to that receiving school, and therefore you no longer have that information. As far as I'm aware, somebody may correct me on that.
So CPOM system is central based.
CPOMs is safeguarding anyway, but it's pulling the information across. So as soon as you have gone, that's my information, you've taken it, it actually removes it from that database there. So only one copy of it exists. Whereas within EduKey's provision map,
it clones it.
Effectively it clones it. In fact, what it does is it takes a snapshot at that point in time, which means, when we're talking about transferring the files in the summer term, you can transfer the whole lot because it's going over there. However, you do need to have the student UPN numbers and dates of birth and all of that business.
Lots of other stuff that we're not going to get into in this very quick, short.
It was supposed to be a short
FAQ.
You've also got your MIS data. Some schools store it within their MIS. and your MIS systems, so SIMS, Bromcom, Arbor, whatever it is you're using, you would need to check in there that data retention of that information. The biggest worry for me, and it's not my worry because I'm not the one that's going to get sued over it and taken to court, so I don't know why I worry about it, but the biggest worry for me is schools that use OneDrive or Google Drive or SharePoint or Teams or any of those kind of, just a flash drive, whatever you want to call it. What happens there is that you've got what we call local data. And actually, it's okay, you can store it on local data, and you can, if you're a primary school, you could store it on that. You can have it as a year group, and then you delete that year group as you pass it across. But most people won't delete it. They'd rather pay for extra storage space than release some storage space by deleting them. But the other thing is, when you get into secondary, again, remember, we've got to retain it till we're age 31. So we've got, and you just worked out it was 15 years. So we've got data systems that become obsolete. So how do you make sure you've still got that data 10 years after that child has left? If you stuck it on a CD-ROM, what happens if that CD-ROM gets broken? Not that people put data on CD-ROM.
I was going to say, who uses a CD-ROM anymore? Is it floppy disk?
Yeah, it's a floppy disk. It's 3.5, not 5.25. I can remember 5.25 floppy disks.
I have no idea.
They were floppy.
Actually, no, I do. Don't worry. I'm not that young.
It's a cassette. So they may be putting it on a flash drive. They may be storing a flash drive somewhere, but the integrity of that data can get lost because that flash drive might decay. It might start destroying. So you actually have to not the SENCO, but somebody in the school responsible for data needs to be checking it at least on a yearly basis. But that possibly means you need 2 copies of it just in case it, grandfather, father, son system, to make sure that we're not losing data that we should have. And we need to know where that information is so that there is a destruction cycle. There are ISO guidelines for keeping data. A lot of systems don't actually comply to that, which makes it really worrying in terms of that electronic data transfer. So it's one of those really woolly areas. Have I heard of schools being sued over it? No. Do I know schools that have got into trouble and had their knuckles rapped? Yes. Am I aware of primary schools who have still got data on students that left 10, 15, 20 years ago? Worryingly, yes. Have I, as a SENCO, still got a USB stick on it with a whole load of reading data? Some year 7s? Yes, but when I found it the other week, I deleted all their names because I was slightly worried about it. You might want to edit that out.
No, she hasn't.
Not anymore.
The answer to that.
Not anymore.
The strange thing is, though, you do store a lot of stuff on random things as you kind of go along, and you do put things on flash drives, and then you completely forget about them. And then one day you look at your flash drive and go, "Oh my god, what's on this? I need some space for something." Put it in, and it's rubbish. I was going to swear. Oh, rubbish. There's loads of student data on it. Quick, delete, delete, delete. Not that anybody's going to find it, but you actually feel kind of guilty for having that data then.
But a lot of us, it's our laptops. So I use a personal laptop. I don't have a school laptop anymore. But, we live in an internet-connected world. We use the cloud all of the time. But sometimes we don't have the internet. And we're quite paranoid about it as teachers and as SENCOs and all the rest of it. So you keep a local copy on your laptop. And at the end of the year, you kind of file them all into a box that says 2022 and keep it on your laptop just in case you need to refer back to it. But that's where the problem goes. And in fact, it's not just to do with data retention at that point. It becomes an integrity of data because you should only have one copy of anything that any changes are made to. Otherwise, the copy on your laptop, the copy that's in the cloud, and the copy that's on his laptop could end up being 3 entirely different pieces of information. So how do I know which is the most recent one?
Exactly. And when you send it off to the secondary school, if you're a primary school, you send in 3 different copies of the same thing with different information on it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I need to cut a load of me out of it, that's for sure. Thank you for watching this one here. If you have any other kind of comments, please just put them at the bottom there. There's things scrolling across the bottom here now.